Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And for today's show, I will not be doing a solo hour. Cenk Uygur is running late, but he will be here very soon. However, I will be covering a really important update to possible Medicare cuts by the House GOP in the first segment. Later in the show, along with Cenk Uygur, we'll cover a whole host of other stories in the news today, including the absolute fury that President Donald Trump has been met with in regard to the possibility of him accepting a $400 million plane from the Qatari royals. Seems like there is bipartisan anger in regard to that very notion. And it's really interesting because you don't see the same type of anger when it comes to other forms of government corruption. I mean, I remember the story about homeboy Henry Cuellar up in Texas, a Democratic lawmaker, of course, allegedly taking bribes from Azerbaijan. Whatever happened to that? Didn't really hear much about that. There wasn't all this anger and fury about a foreign government bribing allegedly a member of Congress. Now, of course, Bob Menendez, a Democratic senator, ended up getting prosecuted and convicted for taking illegal bribes from foreign countries and will now serve time in prison as a result of that. But that story didn't get nearly as much attention as this story involving the Qatari royals and their relationship with Trump. So we're gonna get to all of that later in the show. First though, I do wanna talk a little bit about what the latest updates are on the House budget bill, which does in fact include some cuts to Medicaid. Let's get to it. Protesters representing healthcare workers, people with disabilities, and Planned Parenthood stormed the Rayburn building during a congressional hearing on potential Medicaid cuts today. And as a result, Capitol Police are reporting that 26 people have been arrested for not taking part in the protest, but for disrupting the House hearing on the budget bill, the big, beautiful budget bill that Donald Trump is urging Congress to pass, which of course will include nearly $5 trillion in tax cuts. And to offset the cost of those tax cuts, we've been hearing over and over again that Congress will be cutting wasteful spending. Well, where do you think they're looking? They're looking at Medicaid, of course. Now, Medicaid is basically a state-run public health care program, but it is funded in large part by the federal government. This was a huge part of the Affordable Care Act. It expanded Medicaid coverage in states by providing additional federal resources in order to do so. Now, of course, Medicaid appears to be on the chopping block to some extent for House Republicans, but they're trying to do it in a very tricky pizzicky way. Let me explain how. What are the proposed cuts? Well, if you can recall, the House's budget blueprint had directed the House Energy and Commerce Committee to find $880 billion in cuts over the next decade. Now, this also happens to be the committee that's in charge of the social programs like Medicaid. And so as a result, House Republicans have released their plan to cut Medicaid spending. Well, technically cut Medicaid spending, and I'll give you the caveats and the details in just a moment. But some fiscal hawks in the party are actually complaining that these proposed cuts don't go far enough. So what am I referring to? What do I mean when I say technically they're cuts? Well, the dollar amount provided to states to expand their Medicaid or keep their Medicaid programs will remain the same. That's what they're alleging. However, it will include work requirements. So if you are an individual who does not make enough money, does not have enough income in order to pay for your own private health insurance, or if you don't have a job that provides health insurance, maybe because you're working part-time, well, in order to qualify for Medicaid, the federal government, Republicans in the federal government specifically, want to ensure that able-bodied individuals are working in order to qualify. This will also include more frequent eligibility checks in order to ensure that people receiving these benefits are eligible to do so. And I should note, it doesn't lower the minimum share the federal government contributes to Medicaid in each state or the cap per person spending in the program. So this is the tricky pizzicky way they are cutting, Medicaid. What they're essentially doing is saying like, no, the dollar amount is gonna be the same. It's just that we're gonna make it harder for people to be eligible for Medicaid. So people will be kicked off the rolls. And as a result of that, the federal government will be saving some resources. I just find it interesting that whenever it comes to cutting spending, the first thing on the chopping block tends to be programs that help the most vulnerable people in this country, fellow Americans who desperately need healthcare coverage, but don't have the means or the money to be able to afford it. So as far as the work requirements go, let's get granular. Let's see what they're proposing here. The bill would require Medicaid recipients to work, volunteer, or attend school for 80 hours per month. Okay, so the requirement would apply to most able-bodied adults through age 64 without dependents and includes exceptions for pregnant women, people with substance use disorders, and others. Now, I need a little more clarity on this because what happens if you are searching for work but are unable to find work? Something that might become more of a problem if Donald Trump does intend to move forward with some of the more astronomical tariffs that he is implementing on our trade partners, right? So if it's more costly to get the parts you need for your business, if it's more expensive to get the products you need to sell in your business, you're likely going to shut your business down. It's going to file for bankruptcy, or you're going to lay off workers. So that's just something to keep in mind. All of these different proposed policies don't just stand alone in a vacuum. You have to look at the bigger picture, the current economic conditions, and what House Republicans are proposing here. So when Arkansas, by the way, briefly implemented work requirements for Medicaid recipients, 1 in 4 participants in that state, which amounted to about 18,000 people, lost their healthcare coverage, and that was the point. Okay, that was the point. So that is what the House Republicans are trying to do here, just make it more difficult for people to be eligible for Medicaid benefits. So there's this assumption that Americans who need help from the social safety net are just these lazy people who are unwilling to earn an income and take care of themselves. But I actually want to go to this analysis that was done by the Kaiser Family Foundation. Now, KFF is not in any way associated with Kaiser, meaning like the healthcare system, the hospital. This is entirely separate. But they did an analysis to see, what percentage of Americans are actually working while receiving these benefits. And by the way, they're eligible for the benefits, meaning they're working, but they're still not generating enough income to be able to afford health insurance on their own, which is why they're eligible for Medicaid. Well, let's take a look at this breakdown, this fun pie chart. So if you look at this, it'll show you that 64% of Medicaid recipients are working. And by the way, this data is from 2023, as you can see, work status and barriers to work among Medicaid adults, 2023. So it focuses specifically on adults. So that's 26.1 million people. And 64% of them are actually working, they are employed. 44% of them are working at least 35 hours a week, which this analysis has considered full-time work. 20% of the individuals are actually working part-time. The rest are not working though, due to illness or disability, school attendance, or because they're a caregiver to a loved one. Okay, I'm now learning firsthand just how labor intensive it is to take care of a loved one who has fallen ill. It's a difficult job to do. It's hard to balance a full-time job while doing that simultaneously. So I would like to live in a country that actually supports our fellow Americans as they're going through what could be the hardest period of their lives, taking care of a loved one who has fallen ill or is trying to recover from a serious injury. So the data on whether this will save money, by the way, is mixed. And I think it's really important to know that. So a 2023 analysis from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office found that imposing work rules on Medicaid recipients ages 19 to 55 who are not parents or caregivers would cut federal spending by an estimated $109 billion over the next 10 years. Wow, that sounds like a lot of money until you remember that the tax cuts that Trump implemented in 2017 cost our federal government a whopping $10 trillion. $10 trillion. That's insane. Okay, and he wants to implement additional tax cuts, which will amount to close to $5 trillion. And so, you look at this $109 billion over the next 10 years that would be saved allegedly through Medicaid cuts, drop in the bucket. But that's the analysis that looks pretty good for the case that Republicans are making. But as I mentioned, the data's mixed. So, also, in 2018, the CBO estimated that states would incur $65 billion in administrative costs over 10 years to implement and manage work requirements. Because remember, if you're going to impose work requirements on Americans who want to qualify for Medicaid, well, you gotta add to the bureaucracy, bro. Okay, who's gonna check to make sure these people are working? You're gonna have to hire people. That onus, by the way, will be placed on the states. So the federal government is going to force the states to incur additional costs in order to carry out this work requirement policy for Medicaid, which is just being used as a ridiculous facade in saving money to justify additional tax cuts. Okay, got it. So here are the other ways the Republicans in the House plan to save money by cutting eligibility to Medicaid. So the legislation seeks to ensure only those who are eligible remain on Medicaid rolls, delaying Biden-era rules on looser eligibility checks and blocking federal funds for Medicaid recipients whose citizenship or immigration status is unverified. So the bill would also reduce federal Medicaid payments to states that provide healthcare coverage for immigrants in the country illegally. So look, this is going to be a huge problem for states like California and New York, which have proudly provided Medicaid coverage to individuals in the country illegally. And so I want to give you an example of California, because California actually is in a little bit of trouble financially as we speak. We've lost a huge portion of our tax base, which has left the state to find more affordable places to live, obviously. At the same time, because of all these nonprofit grifts that have popped up since 2020, we have lost tens of billions of dollars in funding that was allocated specifically to build housing and help the homeless. That money is still unaccounted for. It is unbelievable that there hasn't been any justice with that massive loss of taxpayer resources. And so there have been budget shortfalls in recent years. LA specifically is dealing with a massive $1 billion budget shortfall. And so there have been some proposed cuts to all sorts of services in the state of California. At the same time, look, it is true, providing healthcare to all, including those who might not be documented, is a costly endeavor. And so in 2023, California expanded Medi-Cal, which is the state's Medicaid program, to include all undocumented immigrants regardless of age. Now, the Newsom administration wrongly underestimated how much this would cost. He initially projected the cost would be $6.4 billion. However, in March, he requested state lawmakers approve an additional $2.8 billion loan to help cover for the state's soaring Medicaid costs. So that's just a little bit of a tangent. Out of everything that's being proposed in regard to saving money or doing cuts or making it more difficult to qualify for Medicaid, I would say this is the one area where Republicans have a little bit of a point. However, I also know that Republicans are very heavy-handed in wanting to make it very difficult for people to qualify or be eligible for Medicaid. So I would rather them not touch Medicaid at all. But let me continue with the other things they want to do. So the proposal would also require some able-bodied Medicaid recipients, those making more than 100% of the federal poverty level, or wow, a whopping $15,650 for a single adult. I mean, living the high life, to pay for some of their coverage. Okay, this is ridiculous. $15,600 is not enough money to live without having to worry about paying for part of your healthcare coverage. I mean, the people that are being singled out here are the very Americans we should want our resources to go to. These are the Americans who are living in poverty. These are the people we want to help. Like, the audacity to specifically single out people making $15,600 a year, like, oh, you know, they can sacrifice a little money for their healthcare coverage. Can they? Can they? It's just so ridiculous. Let me give you the rest of that. So the contributions would be capped at $35 a service, or 5% of an individual's income, and wouldn't be required for primary, prenatal, pediatric, or emergency care. So with all of these, granular details in mind, you can kind of understand why people are furious. Americans who have been dealing with these horrible economic conditions, inflation, additional possible inflation as a result of this, impending trade war that Trump has sparked with all of our trade partners. All of these things have screwed up Americans economically, financially. And so to add this layer to it is going to infuriate a lot of people across the political aisle. Because what the House Republicans are signaling to the American people right now is, yeah, those insanely wealthy people in this country, those corporations that already have an effective tax rate that's so low that they get a tax refund when they file for their taxes. Yeah, those people, we want to help them out more. But all those Americans who are earning $15,650 a year, nah, we think they're lazy bums and they should pay more for their health insurance. There will be political repercussions to this, and they deserve it if this actually comes to pass. So look, more than 70 million people in this country rely on Medicaid for healthcare. 70 million. You want to mess with those people and you think you're going to get away with it? All right, have at it. Midterms are coming. Midterms are coming. They're coming. It's coming faster than the White Walkers, okay? Midterms are coming, and if they want to mess with Americans who have been living in these economic conditions and who need a little bit of help in order to get preventative health care, to see a doctor, okay, just don't cry when you see the consequences. So look, the House Energy and Committee and Commerce Committee chair, his name is Brett Guthrie, in an interview cast the changes as slowing down runaway growth in Medicaid rather than cuts. He's saying they're not cuts, although the whole point is to drop people from Medicaid. He also admitted that while the more moderate members of the GOP will probably favor this approach, the fiscal hawks in the Republican Party will not appreciate this. They want more cuts. And if you're wondering, has there been any analysis in regard to the impact this would have on Medicaid recipients? Well, yes. In fact, Democrats requested that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office do an analysis to see how many Americans could be pushed off of Medicaid as a result, if this passes, by the way. And that analysis showed that the bill would lead to about 8.6 million people losing insurance. And Guthrie says, I think the people who will have the most difficult time with it would be that it doesn't go far enough. So according to the fiscal hawks in the Republican Party, 8.6 million Americans losing Medicaid coverage doesn't go far enough. We should cut deeper. Bread and butter issues matter the most to Americans, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum. The reason why Donald Trump throughout the years since 2016 has been able to increase his support among various demographics in the electorate is because he pays lip service to those economic frustrations. Now, these are the House Republicans. This is what they want to do. The question is, what does Trump want to do? Because he has said repeatedly he doesn't want to cut these services because he understands how politically unpopular it would be to do so. So I'm waiting on Trump. I'm waiting to hear what he has to say. Because if you think cutting Medicaid eligibility is the right way to go about another massive tax cut handout to your rich buddies, and there won't be any consequences to it, you've got another thing coming. There will be consequences. There will be blood. Just not in the form of a nurse drawing blood from a patient who needs to see if there's anything wrong with them, who might need preventative care, because they might not be able to afford it or pay the $35 a month to qualify for Medicaid because they're living high on the hog with $15,600 in yearly earnings. This is pathetic. We'll be right back.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk Ugranik is sparing with you guys, but also David Baldessaro. You're awesome for signing up. We appreciate you guys. And Harry Keeley, thank you guys. I love doing this show with you guys. So we got Operation Joy tonight for the members. You guys are gonna love those happy stories. In the midst of the biggest darkness that people have seen for a long time, we bring you light through you guys, through our actual audience, members, viewers, etc. And check out tyt.com/joy, where a lot of those stories are, and share your own story. You don't have to be a member.
Later in the show, we're gonna bring you a Dusty Johnson. That's a real name.
Okay.
That person exists.
All right, that's what happened today, apparently.
Yeah.
All right. Also later today, the story I'm most animated about. I know we've been over 100 times, but mainstream media just figured out Biden's too old. And so we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna talk about other older Democrats. And our, speaking of tyt.com, our poll there, our daily poll there is, should we respect senior Democratic leaders like James Clyburn? I have strong opinions on that, okay? But a lot of people think, of course, you do respect. So we'll see. All right, Casper, what's next?
There is chaos in the DOJ. Let's get to it.
Honestly, every single day, Pam Bondi is on Fox News. She's on Fox News more than she does her job, and other people are starting to realize it.
And that might be by design, but Pam Bondi is not happy about it. So it turns out that, last week, Laura Loomer, as you just heard, fumed at Attorney General Pam Bondi for spending all of her time doing these Fox News appearances. But according to a new report by the New York Times, Bondi really does see her media touring as part of her job. The problem is it's kind of become her only job, according to this report. So the same report explains that Pam Bondi is more of a mouthpiece, or I guess like the outward facing representative of the DOJ as opposed to the person calling the shots. That's like really the thesis of this whole piece. And that really does raise an important question, Cenk. If it's not Pam Bondi serving as DOJ or as the Attorney General in the Department of Justice, who is calling the shots?
Yeah, well, we have some answers to that as this story is going to reveal. But I'm torn on this story. So I'm not torn in terms of the policy or substance. No, it's a disaster at DOJ. It's as bad as you could have imagined. But is it true that a lot of the job is optics and that the Democrats didn't understand that? Yes, that part is true, okay? That comes at the very end. But first, let's find out who's actually in charge of the Justice Department and making the decisions. As you'll see, it's a person who's not even a lawyer.
Well, we'll get to that shortly, actually. But before we get to who the person calling the shots happens to be, the piece titled "As White House Steers Justice Department, Bondi Embraces Role of TV Messenger." So for this piece, the Times spoke to 20 current and former officials and reported that Bondi sees her role as that of a surrogate, a faithful executor and high volume messenger compelled to cede ground to empowered players in the West Wing and in her own building who exercise significant authority that rivals her own. She does not appear to have played a major role in creating overall strategies, focusing on aligning her department with the game plan and framing attacks on opponents, current and former officials said. So Media Matters for America says that during President Donald Trump's first 100 days in office, Bondi appeared on Fox and Fox Business 24 times, which is a lot. That's every other day almost. And so here's a look at some of her appearances.
You said last week that you have the Epstein files on your desk. When can we see them, and what's taking so long to release them?
I do. I think tomorrow, Jesse, breaking news right now, you're going to see some Epstein information being released by my office.
The president suggested over the weekend maybe rebuild and reopen Alcatraz, put him there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean someplace.
I'm all for that. All for that, and I think it will be a cost savings. She must apologize immediately, not only to all Texans, but to our country, to the American shareholders of Tesla. President Trump won the popular vote by an overwhelming majority. 1 grain of fentanyl. I put it in here to show you earlier. You can barely see it. It looks like 1 grain. This is salt, not fentanyl. 1 grain is all it takes to kill an American citizen.
Your tax dollars hard at work, ladies and gentlemen. Now, again, the big question is if she's just doing media appearances and that's really the only role that she has within the Department of Justice, who's calling the shots. It turns out it's Stephen Miller.
Yeah, well. All right, so first of all, we got a poll in the live chat. What's worse, having Pam Bondi in charge or Stephen Miller in charge? I have thoughts on that as well. And so already Miller is worse. I totally agree. Watch the show live 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern and be part of the show here. All right, so first of all, on those appearances, 2 thoughts on it. Number one, it's embarrassing. Like when you go out there and you are so over the top like she is, like he won with a great majority, like he won by 2 points. Okay, which for Republicans is like a minor miracle because they almost never win the popular vote in the national election. But don't pretend that it was like 60% and everybody's falling at his feet, especially when his polling's at 39%, 40% in that ballpark right now. So it's, on the other hand, this is the problem with the Republican and Democratic parties. They have completely divergent problems, okay? But at the same time, serving the same purpose. So Merrick Garland didn't know what a television camera was. Never saw one, didn't understand what a microphone was, couldn't make his case if his life depended on it, and slept in he was Rip Van Winkle, if you remember that old story. Like just sleeping in a cave somewhere. That's terrible, that's terrible. You gotta go and be aggressive and make your case, etc. She, on the other hand, all she does is TV. And she just comes on and she's like, oh my God, I don't know if you know, but Donald Trump is the great person to ever live. You're like, oh, Jesus Christ, man.
I get that the heads of federal government agencies, bureaucrats, and even elected lawmakers, especially elected lawmakers, lie. That's what they do, they're liars, right? And so I'm not shocked that she went on Fox News and lied about the Epstein files, but it was just such a brazen, specific lie.
Yeah.
Like tomorrow, Jesse Waters, you're gonna see the Epstein files. Did we see the Epstein files though?
No, but here's the thing, Anna, and I think that's one of the really interesting parts of the story. And I'm very curious to see if it's gonna then land on Stephen Miller's shoulders, okay? Because in the old days, if you were a Democrat who lied, oh, Joe Biden's young and dynamic, the mainstream media would be like, bravo, yeah, Joe Biden's the youngest person who's ever lived, right? And then with Trump team, for the MAGA crew, if you said Donald Trump is 8 feet tall and shoots lightning bolts out of his arse, right? They would be like, of course he does, right? And so you could tell any lie you want if you were a Democrat or a Republican, and you would have a squadron of people in media going, it's absolutely true, he's 8 foot tall, and he's young, blah, blah. So now Pam Bondi is getting caught with new media at the helm, and the situation is a little bit different. And so what did we tell you guys here on the Young Turks? I said, look, I've been all over these shows, and they're gonna splinter because they don't agree. So why did Pam Bondi get caught? Did she get caught by the New York Times? This is a really good story. It has really interesting details we didn't know, like Stephen Miller's in charge, etc. We'll get to more of those in a second. But no, she got caught by the right wing guys. And why? Because she was kissing Trump's ass. No, they don't mind that at all, right? No, because she said the Epstein files would be there, and they weren't there. And when they caught her and they're super mad about it, she's like, I don't get it. I lie 24/7. I took like $25,000 from Donald Trump and dropped a case against him, and no one minded. I mean, I made $3 million with another deal I made with Trump. No one minded. Why are you guys minding all of a sudden when I'm lying? I'm supposed to lie. I think that's her reaction.
Yeah, and look, honestly, the release of the Epstein files is a priority for Trump supporters, for MAGA. That is something that they wanted. That is something that Trump promised to do for them. And so it is it took balls to engage in that very specific lie, right?
Yeah, but she didn't know, I'm telling you, she didn't know that she was gonna get caught by her own side. In fact, nobody knew that, like other than us. I'm being honest, right? You could hate me for it, but it's true. Like if you ask the Democrats, or is MAGA gonna catch Trump's ass-kissing attorney general? Every Democrat would have said, no way. MAGA will never turn on the attorney general as long as she's got Trump on his corner, and no Republican would have believed it, etc. But you can say, all right, now what I'm curious about is this Stephen Miller then, like, is he involved in not releasing the Epstein files?
Maybe.
And that's a really important question. Is Stephen Miller gonna get caught? Or are they gonna give him a free pass?
We'll see. But I do want to remind everyone of who Stephen Miller is. So let's go to the very last video here. This is J3. This is the guy who's calling the shots in the Department of Justice.
Let me also just say, since we're addressing the subject of style, the most stylish president and first lady in our lifetimes are Donald Trump and Melania Trump. Donald Trump's a style icon. He changed American fashion in The Apprentice. People spent the next 10 years trying to dress like Donald Trump. So if anybody deserves a puff piece on their sense of style, it's Donald Trump and the First Lady. Joe Biden, to the point that Mike Huckabee made so well, looks like a walking corpse. The only style article that should be written about Joe Biden is how you've mastered the art of looking embalmed.
The scales of justice look great. So he is not a lawyer, but he, it was clear from the start that Miller, who is not a lawyer, would exercise control inside the department, current and former Trump aides said. So look, there are two more power players in the Trump administration, or I should say in Trump's Department of Justice, and they actually happen to be Trump's personal lawyers, Todd Blanch and Emil, Boove III, who serve as Pam Bondi's top two subordinates. Now, according to the Times, they oversee the day-to-day operations of the department, and Bondi was deeply displeased by the arrangement and told friends it undermined control over her own organization. It made no difference. She has tried to adapt and has become close to Boove, a stoic enforcer who she refers to as Sweet Emil, according to several officials. Now, one example of Bondi's limited power has to do with the January 6 pardons, which is a really interesting revelation from the story. So she apparently only wanted pardons to be issued to the non-violent individuals who had either been convicted or charged. The Time reports that Bondi was blindsided by Trump's decision to just pardon everybody, blanket pardon, including the violent rioters, including the individuals who assaulted police officers. It's all caught on camera. So here's how the Trump administration responded to the Times's report. Chad Mizell, the Attorney General's chief of staff, said close coordination with the West Wing was essential to fight a liberal department workforce. President Biden, he argued, did not need to exert Such control because most career staff members were already willing to blindly implement his agenda. Cenk.
Yeah, so this story is filled with like unbearable details of how these guys operate. And I know, so this portion, most of MAGA doesn't know. I don't know if they'll ever know, right? But it's important for all of us to know, and it's most important for independents to know. So the part of the story that bothered me the most is Pam Bondi goes into a meeting with one of her top lawyers, and in that room, they haven't yet changed Biden and Kamala Harris's and Merrick Garland's pictures, right? They've only been there a couple of months. It's an oversight. Nobody's trying to do anything with it, right? So she sees and she goes, "Oh, you should change those pictures." So far, no problem. Okay, she's, they should change the pictures. She walks out of the room, fires the guy.
Like immediately?
Immediately, fires him.
That's hilarious.
Come
And
on.
I'm not sanctioning it. I don't think it's a good thing. It's just like, it's unbelievably ridiculous and egotistical to do that. Like, who cares?
Yeah. So, because to them, the law is totally irrelevant. Serving the average American voter is totally irrelevant. The only thing that matters is how hard you kiss Trump's ass. And this is really, as an American citizen, it's unbearable. The Department of Justice is supposed to be independent of the White House. It's supposed to be that no one is above the law and that we're all treated equally and justice for all. You remember that, right? Here, they're brazen about it. They're like, if you even unwittingly, subconsciously slight Donald Trump by having the wrong picture up on your wall or whatever it might be, you look at me kind of funny. You're fired, you're fired. I talked to somebody at a Young Turks meet and greet in Chicago today. He works for the government. He's like, nobody looks at each other anymore in the government offices. We're all so scared. And we go into work, we keep our head down, and we try not to get fired because you don't know what you're gonna get fired for.
How is that different from most people working for corporations?
Well, no, I hear you, but they go and do their jobs,
Yeah,
right?
I get it, yeah.
And they're not worried about it like Gestapo-like government officials, and not just like, hey, are you doing something liberal or are you doing something extreme from the past or something? No, are you sufficiently loyal to the dear leader? This is how a communist dictatorship runs. This is how you get the tyranny of government, etc. So now, speaking of tyranny, we go back to Stephen Miller. So the only thing worse than Pam Bondi, whose only job is apparently puckering up for Trump, is Miller, who just said a couple of days ago that we should suspend the writ of habeas corpus.
But how neocon of him,
okay,
by the way.
So first of all, yeah, that is a neocon position, that's right. And so Stephen Miller is not a lawyer, and he goes, oh, I know, yeah, it's an invasion. Yeah, that's what it is. But wait, is it an invasion or did you close the border? Because I thought you were bragging about closing the border a minute ago. And if the border is closed, how's it an invasion? It's only been used 4 times, every time in actual war circumstances, right? This is not a war circumstance at all, right? But they're like, oh, there is an invasion of their country. We are going to suspend it. So what, if you don't know what that is the reason why it's cornerstone of our Constitution and Western civilization is, in the old days, tyrannical governments and kings would just grab somebody up off their property, and they'd lock him up, and they lock him up forever. And people say, where'd he go? Say, I don't care. I don't have to show you. I'm king. I could be as tyrannical as I like. And then through the Magna Carta, the lords originally got the right to say, hey, you have to show me to a judge. If you're gonna arrest someone, you have to show them to a judge and say why you arrested them. If you don't have that, we're back in the dark ages. We're back to total dictatorships, right?
And guys, look, just to give you a sense of how backwards this is and how ridiculous this is, I remember during the Bush administration, he actually did suspend habeas corpus specifically for suspected terrorists. And just like we're hearing today with Trump supporters who are totally on board with doing away with habeas corpus for undocumented immigrants, at the time during the Bush administration, the big argument was, well, we're suspending habeas corpus for suspected terrorists. No, but you need due process when the federal government unilaterally points to you or points to anybody and claims that they're terrorists. You should be able to have your day in court and force the federal government to provide evidence showing that you are that you are actually engaged in terrorist activities. Okay, by the way, the Supreme Court struck it down. I think it took about a year, but the Supreme Court finally did strike it down.
Yeah.
So the idea of suspending habeas corpus, people think like, oh, they're foreigners, who cares? They have no rights. First of all, they do have rights. This has been established by the Supreme Court multiple times. Our constitutional rights extend to people who are in the country but are undocumented, okay? And by the way, who's to say the federal government can't accuse someone who is an American citizen, engage in a case of mistaken identity, accuse that person of being in the country illegally, accuse that person of allegedly being a gang member. And if you just suspend habeas corpus in regard to those people, those American citizens wouldn't have their day in court.
Yeah, so last things here. So going along with what Anna was saying, Supreme Court has ruled for 200 years that the rights in the Constitution apply to people that are in this country, whether they're citizens or not citizens. So you could say you don't agree with that, okay? But once you take that right away from citizens or non-citizens, you erode your own rights because the Supreme Court has said they are the same rights. Okay, so now if you say, well, no, I don't, they should set a new standard and non-citizens should have no rights at all. I don't care about 200 years of American history or Supreme Court decisions, and it should only be for citizens. Okay, well, now you're on to the second problem with due process and rid of habeas corpus. If they don't have to present you to a court, you could scream from inside a dungeon in Louisiana or El Salvador, but I'm a citizen, And they won't hear you because they never had to present you to a court.
Exactly. Look, I'll give you another specific example. My husband was born in the United States, okay, in Miami. He has a name that is shared by many drug cartel members, apparently. And I didn't know this until I finally gathered the courage to ask customs. And when you fly back to the United States from a foreign country, you have to go through customs. And every single time they pull him to a separate room and interrogate him. And look, it sucks that he's being interrogated, but I gotta go. I've got things to do. So like, why are you guys wasting my time? What's going on? I'm kidding. But like, seriously, like, why are they doing this every time? Simply because his name is Christian Lopez. And they admitted this to me. His name's Christian Lopez. There are a lot of like wanted cartel members with that name, so we have to interrogate him. Well, what if a mistake is made and there's mistaken identity and he gets accused of being one of those cartel members?
Yeah, first of all, there could be mistakes. There have already been mistakes, right? And the Trump administration, Biden administration, any administration is going to be perfect and never make a mistake. No, that doesn't make any sense. That's why we have habeas corpus. That's why we have due process. And it could be not just mistakes. I mean, you got your husband. My nephew was pulled over by Customs and Border Enforcement coming back into the country just a couple of days ago. He's an American citizen. He was born here. And they started questioning him about his views on Israel and on Trump. First of all, his views on Trump and Israel, his views on anything is irrelevant. He's a US citizen, right? But now wait a minute, left wing, right wing, middle wing. If you got the wrong view on Israel and you're a citizen, but they decide, oopsie doopsie, we just sent you away, and I don't have to present any evidence to a court. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? I'll tell you what you're gonna do. You're gonna say, oh my God, this is the tyrannical government I was worried about.
Exactly.
And guess what they're doing, brother? They're treading on you. You told them, don't tread on me. And here they are treading all over you and all over all of us.
Exactly. Here at TYT, we believe no step on snake.
Snake.
All right. We got to take a break. When we come back, a lot more to get to. We'll talk about the proposed American land grab in Gaza. We'll also talk about, in my opinion, a fantastic interview between Dave Smith and Tucker Carlson. What? Yes, I'm gonna show you the snippets. You're gonna love it. Don't miss it. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT, Jen Canana with you guys. More news.
You know, Cenk, all of a sudden, politicians from both sides of the political aisle really concerned about foreign corruption of our politicians, super worried about it. Wow, okay, well, let's give you the details.
I'm not a fan of Qatar. I also think that the plane poses significant espionage and surveillance problems. So we'll see how this issue plays out, but I certainly have concerns.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who you just heard from, is far from the only politician or even the only Republican who's speaking out against their king, Donald Trump, for considering accepting a $400 million plane to essentially serve as Air Force One that would be gifted by the Qatari royals. Apparently, all of a sudden, you have all these conservatives who are worried about government corruption. In fact, conservative media personalities, representatives, and senators who seem to totally be okay with corruption in all other forms, suddenly have this issue with Qatar bribing one of our politicians, in this case, the president of the United States. Others are defending Trump, but we'll get to them later, Cenk.
Yeah, so just shocked to find gambling in this establishment. So it turns out that maybe other countries are trying to influence them. I wonder if the top lobbying group in the country that has the word Israel in its name is mentioned by any of these people. Oh, that's so weird. None of them mention it, and neither does the media. The media that's now saying, I can't believe Biden lied to us. It turns out he was old. What are we, reporters? How could we figure that out?
Yeah.
Is going to say one day when they get caught on AIPAC and the fact that they never, ever, ever covered the fact that AIPAC was the #1 donor in this election cycle, etc. They will then go, I didn't know. It turns out that this lobbying group was for Israel. All I knew about was bad Qatar. Bad Qatar. So we're gonna give you all those details, but as we give you these folks who are pretending to care about this, I need you to remember that Qatar is home to the forward headquarters of United States Central Command in the Middle East. And it also has Combined Air Operations Center for the United States in Qatar. So Qatar is an actual ally that actually allows bases in their country and has greeted us with open arms throughout. But but they only took care of Trump. They didn't take care of Ted Cruz and all the media and all the other politicians. So whereas the AIPAC did, and all of a sudden that's why we have concerns.
So here's a quick compilation of various conservatives, various Republicans who take issue with the notion that Trump should accept this gift from Qatar.
Taking sacks of goodies from people who support Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al Jazeera, all the rest. That's not America first. Like, please define America first in a way that says you should take sacks of cash from the Qatari royals who are behind Al Jazeera. If you want President Trump's agenda to succeed, taking jets from Qatar is not the way. Taking real estate deals from Qatar is not the way. The largest obstacle to any administration is scandal.
Obviously, we don't want to be straight up accepting any type of gift from any foreign government, certainly not one that can be viewed in a way that obviously has been presented here.
I do think the jet probably sends the wrong signal to people, and I don't like the look or appearance of it, so I would hope that he would reject it. The Constitution specifically says you can't take gifts from foreign leaders.
I don't like it. There's a reason that people can't even buy me a steak dinner. It's not necessarily that you can prove that I've got an ethical problem. It's that the appearance of it doesn't look great.
Yeah, this is the kind of discussion that typically takes place on corporate media. Corporate media loves to cover political bribes 24/7. I mean, the real muckrakers are in the corporate press. And they like to have these conversations, Cenk. They take issue with corruption.
Yeah, so look, some folks are upset about the plane that have nothing to do with the hypocrisy on Israel, right? So I'm included among them. I don't think you should take the plane. I don't know why another country is giving us Air Force One. That seems dangerous. And the fact that Trump is gonna keep it after the election is ridiculous. So why am I concerned about Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and all these other guys who are Israel first? All of a sudden, finding out that there might be corruption in the establishment, because they never said a word about any of the other corruption. They never said a word about all the lobbying, not just from AIPAC, but from big pharma and oil and the bankers and all these. They love that kind of corruption. They never said a word about Trump's meme coin until all of a sudden this plane issue comes up. All of a sudden, Ben Shapiro finds out that Donald Trump is doing meme coin.
They do complain about Soros. Bribing politicians and all that.
But when it comes to Trump, it was like bribe away. And when it comes to all the politicians in our Congress, bribe away, no problem. They love that. So don't tell me that all of a sudden you don't like corruption. No, and so if you don't know the background, Qatar is not, so they are on our side. They're trying to be neutral to the, and if whether you believe them or not is a different question, but Israel perceives them as on the side of the Palestinians. And so since they're on the side of the Palestinians, every supporter of Israel here apparently got a memo. I don't know how, but like they all, or they already knew, right? Because this is an issue they care deeply about, right? So they're like, oh, Qatar is now unduly influencing Trump.
Yeah.
Oh, no way, no Arabs allowed. No influence for any Arabs, anyone supporting Palestinians. That's it, turn on Trump. Everybody turn on Trump. And all of a sudden there's a cacophony. And all of a sudden, every time you turn on a TV, pick up any paper, all of a sudden we care about Donald Trump's corruption. We've been covering it throughout. We told you all those stories, right? So we have the credibility to say, I don't like this plain thing. For all these Johnny-come-latelys that for the first time, when Israel's interests are touched, catch feelings over corruption, don't believe the hype. They don't mean a thing.
Qatar is definitely on the Palestinian side. You had Hamas leadership living in Qatar. Qatar was harboring them. I'm not saying that as if like, oh, we should be enemies with Qatar. No, I actually love the fact that there's a country in the Middle East that looks out for Palestinians to some extent.
Yeah, and
not harboring Hamas, but specifically that they actually give a damn about what's happening to Palestinian civilians.
100%, and to that point, what I was gonna say is that, remember, Netanyahu funneled money to Hamas through Qatar.
Exactly.
So like all of a sudden you found out that Qatar is housing the Hamas guys? No, you knew that all along, and you were pretty happy with that all along. And oh right, you had the memo saying that October 7th was gonna happen, and you didn't do anything. And then, oh, look at that, I had to destroy all of Gaza and try to occupy it. So there no clean hands on Qatar at all when it comes to Netanyahu and the current Israeli government.
So let's talk a little bit about Caitlin Collins's exchange with Representative Rich McCormick. She was asking him whether or not he is comfortable with Trump accepting this $400 million gift. He deflected quite a bit and wanted to talk about Israel instead. Let's watch.
This came up for a vote in Congress. Would you say yes to it?
I don't think it's going to come down to a voting. It's not either. It's either going to be legal or illegal. I don't think Congress, by the Constitution, is in charge of a budget, not in which gifts the president can accept. I think that's a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a doctor. I'm in Congress. We're not going to vote on this. They'll come up whether it's acceptable or not. That's going to remain to be seen. What I'm really worried about is the peace process. What's going on in Israel? Why it happened? How do we mitigate that from happening again?
But Congressman, actually, if you read the emoluments clause, it says no person holding any office shall, without the consent of Congress, except of any present of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state.
You're the reporter. Could you tell me if every gift we ever received from the Middle East has been voted on? Because I don't remember that at all. So I'm just asking.
I'm saying this is the emoluments
general
clause.
purposes.
I mean, typically presidents are not supposed to accept gifts from
Is there? But I know we have, though. Historically, we've accepted gifts from all over the world. The question is there a monetary value on that? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
He's correct. There have been other gifts given by foreign governments to, our politicians. In some cases, our politicians have been prosecuted for accepting those obvious bribes. Bob Menendez, a former Democratic senator, comes to mind, right? He's faced some consequences for that. But let's go to one more representative. This is Ryan Zinci, who tried to defend Trump.
I don't think it's a personal gift. I think it's government to government.
But is that a workaround? Because he said it's going to go to the Trump Presidential Library after.
Well, we'll see where it goes.
So what do you think, though? Are you for it, against it? Where do you stand? Do you have any ethics concerns or constitutional concerns?
I'm glad Pam Bondi stepped in and looked at it from a legal point of view, which is helpful. Again, I'll go back. This must be one heck of a plank. Remember who President Trump is. He's a billionaire businessman from New York. He doesn't sleep in a sleep mag overnight. What he does,
but even if it's a really nice plane and a heck of a plane, that doesn't take away the other ethics and
But I can see the point too. That is it a good look? Is it a good look to have a Qatari aircraft that now is the president? Does it provide a leverage over the Qataris? I don't think so with this president.
That was hilarious. That was hilarious. Listen, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so if we're gonna, that Pandora's box, Cenk, has already been opened, okay? And I just find it so disgusting that the worry, the concern about a foreign government diluting the influence of Israel is what it took for various people to come out and criticize foreign corruption.
Yeah, so preach it. I'm gonna go off on that in a second too. First, one of our members on TYT.com, David Vissi, said, if Israel gave Trump $400 million plane, it would be anti-Semitic to question.
100%.
Of course it would.
You know that would be the argument.
Of course.
Yes.
Right. And so, and for the politicians and for the media, so here's how it works. If any other country gives the president a huge plane that doesn't harm Israel's interests, it would be, oh, okay, it's another story. We'll run it for a little while and then you'll never hear about it again. I mean, how do I know? Because to me, one of the most egregious cases was that guy who was being investigated by the SEC and gave Trump $75 million into his media company, his fake media company. And so it's a digital media, they can't track it. And so the 75 million goes straight into Trump's pocket, right? It doesn't get any worse than that. That's a $75 million bribe to get out of a fraud case, right? And it barely made a peep in the national media. They don't care about corruption. They love corruption.
How many foreign leaders and foreign politicians have bought the membership to Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah, and by the way, the guy I'm talking about is Chinese.
Yeah, how many of them have bought Trump's meme coin in order to, exert their influence over our government, exert their influence over Donald Trump? Look, and it's not just about Trump, guys. Like, it's not just, I wanna make that clear. This isn't just about the president of the United States accepting foreign bribes. This has been a big problem across the board in our government. And there hasn't been this fury over it until now. And that's why I'm frustrated. By the way, the American people, they're consistent on the matter of government corruption. Because even before this story, polling showed that doing something about corruption happened to be one of the top concerns for American voters. Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. And so in regard to this specific issue, YouGov conducted a poll to see where the hearts and minds of Americans are. Should Trump accept this $400 million bribe? And 30% say that it's acceptable for him to do so. But 47% say no, unacceptable, whereas 23% don't really know how they feel about it yet. Not sure.
Because and why is it 47%? First of all, it should be 100%. He should not take the plane, right? But the reason why there's a significant majority or plurality that is saying don't take the plane is because lots of different media are attacking at the same time. You got mainstream media attacking, you got portions of right-wing media attacking, Fox News, other politicians, etc. So then it seems like everybody's unanimous, don't take the plane. And they create this amazing echo chamber. So back to the point about the hypocrisy. So guys, when the corruption was helping Israel, no one talked about the corruption. Now that the corruption for the first time might be slightly against Israel's interest, they're like, corruption! No, mainstream media, you guys suck. You suck, you have no credibility at all to talk about anything. You can't notice all of these lobbies buying all of our politicians? Okay, put aside foreign governments for a second. We can't negotiate drug prices at Medicare. It's the most anti-free market thing there is. It's a direct attack on capitalism, right? It drives up drug prices. It's one of the top issues for Americans. Big Pharma has obviously purchased all of our politicians through campaign contributions, through junkets, through a million other ways, through the revolving door. And mainstream media is like, what's corruption? I don't see it. I bet they did it because they had a real debate. And it turns out the people who want sky-high drug prices and for the big pharma to steal a couple of $1 trillion from the American people, they won that debate. And now you're talking to me about corruption. Okay, no, you guys love corruption. You're the #1 benefactor of corruption because the money in politics goes to mainstream media ads. So when you all of a sudden, when Israel's interests are touched, you find corruption and then you're outraged by it. I don't believe your outrage. I don't believe it at all. So, okay, let's all pretend, and you know what's gonna happen? If they get him to give the plane back or whatever, good, fine, and keep it safe for the 8th time, I don't want it, right? But they'll go right back to ignoring corruption, and no one will notice a thing from here on out. As long as you don't touch Israel, the corruption's 100% fine, and in fact, it's celebrated when it comes to Israel. Yes, our special ally with the most moral army. And then Netanyahu comes and everybody gives standing ovation in Congress. And don't tell me they're not dogs of Big Pharma and AIPAC and every lobby that purchases every one of our politicians. So congratulations, you found one case of corruption. You guys are amazing reporters, amazing. Jesus Christ, man, do your goddamn job.
All right, we've got Dave Smith answering some questions from Tucker Carlson when we come back.